Hello for first time, long time, and this is really just a test run to see if anybody cares about the Michigan State football game and then the Pinstripe Bowl that they were just in. So we're going to see what kind of questions we can get. But as far as the game itself, we'll see, of course, if anybody joins us. And for anybody joining, to get it right out of the way immediately, I'm Ryan. I'm from the Sports Carnage Podcast. We are the podcast that is hosted by Detroit Sports Nation, which is the page that we're all on right now. So if you guys haven't checked us out, go check us out. We have a whole bowl pick'em group, and I'm winning the straight up one at least. I don't know how exactly we're doing against the spread, but one of the games that I did pick correctly was Michigan State, and the spread was like I think 5 or 5.5, and then they ended up winning by 6. So we got the cover there, and then I picked them straight up too. So they came through for me in the clutch in that game, even when really in the fourth quarter it seemed like they were trying to give the game away, both them and Wake Forest. That there's no points in the fourth quarter and a whole lot of mistakes. I think Michigan State themselves was in the red zone like 3 times in the fourth quarter, and obviously the last drive where they're just running out the clock, that doesn't necessarily count. But, the one other time was a fumble, and then Coughlin ended up missing the field goal, which really would have iced the game. But as far as Michigan State goes, I think the one thing that if you're going to watch this game and hope for something for the future, otherwise there's probably no reason to watch this game because it didn't particularly matter in like the grand scheme of things. But one thing that you always hear about in these sort of lesser bowl games from the coaches, the players, and then the broadcasters, if you end up sitting in front of the TV and watching it, is how the extra practices during just before the bowl game, how those end up helping a team out in the future, how those end up helping the team next year, because you get like a mini kind of spring camp in, since you have I think basically a month before like your last game ends. And then at least Michigan State's bowl game today. There's like a month buffer there or something like that. So you have all of that time worth of practices. And for Michigan State, I think it did at least help some of the younger guys. So you look at some of the guys like Trey Mosley, who's gotten some playing time this year. Trenton Gillinson, the tight end, who I know he had the really bad fumble, but he made some big plays. He had a nice 64-yard catch. Who else here? I mean, just other young guys who have contributed all year. Obviously, Elijah Collins, Anthony Williams Jr. saw a little bit of a bigger role in this game, which might be encouraging signs moving forward as far as just like the offense goes next year and the years beyond. The one thing that I really hated, and I understand, playing Brian Lewerke because he's a senior and you want to send him out, but like how you don't end up playing one of the younger guys, whether it's Theo Day or I don't know, or not Rocket, but Theo Day or like Peyton Thorne or one of the other quarterbacks, because Lewerke is not going to be here next year or for the future. That bugged me, how the only other person to throw a pass in this game ended up being Cody White, who did miss Jalen Naylor for a touchdown. But I mean, other than that, I know this game was kind of rocky for fans, and it left at least part of our fan base divided. It left our podcast divided. Dylan on our podcast, if you guys have listened, the only thing he hates more than joy and genuine happiness is Mark D'Antonio and Michigan State football. Very, very spurned fan, and he was infuriated by the fact that Michigan State ended up winning this game, because he wants essentially a whole cleanup and rebuild. And I'm just wondering how many Michigan State fans out there are, kind of along that line of thinking of you're actually rooting against them today because you were just done with the whole program and you were done with, you're done with the coaching staff and everybody else. Or how many fans, were like me today and they were rooting for them just because you want to see your team win. And it's not necessarily like the Lions, who, if you are a Lions fan, I'm sure you want them to lose Sunday so they have a better chance of getting, the number 2 pick in the draft, as opposed to sliding down to, staying at 3, or, God forbid they win and they get to 4 or 5 or something like that. I kind of that dynamic of are you rooting for your team to win today, or are you rooting for them to lose because you want to see sweeping changes and you think this loss is something that can be sort of a catalyst for that? The main thing that I was really hoping to watch today, and we already touched on it a little bit, was just how much better the younger guys could come out and look today. Who was going to get an opportunity to play maybe more than they had? A guy like obviously Trent Gillinson, played a lot today, and it was his quote unquote like breakout game this year. But that's because he hasn't, really played a lot all year. But when he played today, he obviously made the most of his opportunity. And then other guys, again, we already mentioned Train Mosley, Jalen Naylor, who was hurt this year, and came back maybe a part of the last couple games, or maybe he just came back for the bowl game because they had such a long delay from their last game of the season to today. But that's what I take out of these bowl games, personally, is just how kind of trying to gauge the future of your team, even though the team is going to look a lot different next year, mostly, of course, at the quarterback position, because Brian Lewerke will not be here if they don't go out and get a transfer quarterback or somebody in the transfer portal. They're probably going to be looking at Theo Day, Peyton Thorne, maybe even Rocky Lombardi, who we've already seen a little bit of and who I frankly don't like. But none of those guys got to play today, so you don't really know kind of where their mindset's at, as opposed to if, say Lewerke did go down today, who do they think is most ready for the future? That's something I was looking forward to seeing today, and obviously we weren't able to. But you saw some of the other young guys step up. I know Julian Barnett played a little bit today, I think, or maybe not. Who had? Hey, oh no, there's Naylor with the catch on the sideline. I'm sorry. And then they sat out, I know it was Devontae Dobbs too, because they didn't want to burn his red shirt. Derek Burns, who will be MSU's quarterback next season. I mean, we just kind of touched on that, and that's like the $1 million question right now. There are obviously names in the transfer portal. There's KJ Costello from Stanford. Who else is in the transfer portal? The dude from, I think, De'Aaron King from Houston. I don't expect Michigan State to land either of those guys. I think Theo Day probably starts next year, but you didn't really get to see a lot of any of the backups that we had this year. So it's really tough to say, especially since we didn't see it today, so there wasn't any hat tipping from the coaching staff, and we didn't see we obviously still have all of spring practice to figure out the summer and the spring to figure out kind of who's going to take pole position as far as the quarterback race goes. But my money would be on Theo Day, but it's not a bet that I'd lay a whole lot of money down. So maybe my money doesn't really mean anything at this point. That's who I think starts though, but it's really just kind of a guess at this point. I just hope it's not Rocky Lombardi. I hope the coaching staff has seen enough of Rocky Lombardi to where they realize that he's not the answer. And even if the other two guys, Peyton Thorne and Theo Day, aren't any good, at least you give them the opportunity to play and prove that, as opposed to, Rocky Lombardi, who to me has already proved that he is not a good quarterback and should not be part of, and really should just not be part of the program. I'm sure he's a nice enough guy, but as far as, taking snaps from my team, I personally have no interest in that. But of course, other people or others might feel somewhat different. But you saw some of the weapons that the new quarterback will get to work with, and that's the one thing I think if you're going to pull from this game that was encouraging. You're still not super encouraged about the offense. At least I don't think. They did make a ton of mistakes, and with Lewerke being gone, one of the things that I hated all year about Brian Lewerke is he seemed to never, ever be able to hit a man in stride at all. Even the completed passes, they're, up high, they're behind the receivers, and they're just not able to continue. They're just not able to continue running forward where he's able to place the ball, and then you can get some momentum. And then you saw that on the interception that they had today in the red zone where he threw it and it was high to Elijah Collins, and then he ended up smacking it off his hands. And then there's an interception, and then Gillinson had the fumble in the red zone as well. And even from the defense, they played really, way better after the first half. But the first drive they came out, and I think Wake Forest had like a bomb touchdown right over their heads, and then they had another like 44-yard touchdown. So there was still some of the big plays and big play potential, because there were at least 2 times I can think of off the top of my head that the Wake Forest receiver had beaten the cornerback, and the quarterback just wasn't able to get them the ball. But, if you're playing a team like Ohio State, who Michigan State, has to play pretty much every year, that's a ball that's going to be completed, and then it's going to be a touchdown, and then boom, you just gave up 7 points. Bud Light's better. I don't know that I noticed too much of a difference between Bud Light and Miller Lite, honestly. But I did used to drink more Bud Light, and then for whatever reason, I just kind of phased into Miller territory. But when I do go to a certain bar in Ferndale, since I've ordered Bud Light, like every time I've been there, if I walk in there, they just hand me a Bud Light, and obviously I'm not gonna say anything. I'm just gonna drink the beer and appreciate that they remember. Wesley says, do you think the Pistons make a blockbuster trade before the deadline? Sorry for steering away from the Spartans. That's hilarious. No, that's fine. I know we haven't done a Pistons video in a minute, just with the holidays. I haven't really been home for any of the games. Like last night, I was at the Quick Lane Bowl, and I know the Pistons won by 30, but both the games were going on at the same time, so I obviously wasn't able to do this. No, I don't think they make any type of blockbuster trade before the trade deadline. I think they'll make some moves, but as far as blockbuster and going out and getting a guy like Russell Westbrook, who you hear might be available now, or even dealing one of their guys like Andre Drummond or Blake Griffin, I don't think that's going to happen. They might trade Reggie Jackson. That's probably the best chance at what you might consider a blockbuster, but I don't necessarily think that Reggie Jackson garners the type of, he's not the type of player that would classify a deal as a blockbuster move. So sure, short answer is no, but if you count Reggie Jackson, then God bless you. And then the answer would be, at least there's about a 50-50 shot, I think, that they move on from him. Entertaining Quick Lane Bowl. It was, and we left before they ended up throwing the punches. We actually left when Eastern was winning, and then in the car on the radio we heard the touchdown that Pittsburgh got, and then we heard obviously Mike Glass out here swinging on officials and swinging on different players. So it seemed like some of the fun we ended up missing, but even before that, it was a really entertaining game. Like as soon as we got there, because we got there a little bit late, I think one of the first plays we saw was the 96-yard touchdown that Pitt had, and it was crazy watching it, because obviously the guy's in the end zone. So if you count all the yardage from him, from where he threw the ball, they went more than 100 yards. So it was, obviously I was rooting for Eastern because I'm from Michigan, but a 96-yard touchdown is not something that you get to see really in any game that you're ever going to go to. So it was cool to see, really, just regardless who scored it. The only other kind of really long touchdown I can remember being at a game for like that was just fantastic was the Lions played against the Vikings a long time ago, and I think it was like 3rd and 17, and this is when the Vikings had Randy Moss, and he did a post, and he just blew by all the defenders and then caught it. 3rd and 17, and it's probably like a 60 or 70-yard touchdown. But I was a big Randy Moss fan, so that was exciting for me. That was so long ago, though. That ref needs to try for the WWE. Yeah, it looked like a flop, but at the same time, here's where I'll give the ref credit is, one of the players on the field hit you, and it's not like the ref's going to get him back. And, if they got into like a fight, obviously the ref's going to lose. So after he got hit, he recognized it was a losing battle, and he just wanted to get out there as fast as he could. But it was a very funny flop, and you're probably glad that nothing like that happened in the Michigan State and Wake Forest game. Kind of one more note about the game. As far as this year, I do think it's a nice note to end the season on, for Michigan State, because Wake Forest is the best win and the best team that they've beaten all year. Before that, their best win's probably really Indiana. And I think Wake Forest is a better team than Indiana. And, obviously it doesn't help you in terms of what you wanted to do. And the season is still disappointing with all the bad losses that they had. But, it's just a nice win for the players and, for the fans. If you're just rooting for your team to win, beating Wake Forest was, at least better than really anything that we saw all season, even if, the play on the field wasn't necessarily, really the best that they've played all year. Still, again, a lot of mistakes with the interception that they're working through, the fumble. But, also they had they were able to do some things on defense. They had the defensive touchdown. I can't remember if they caused another fumble or another interception. Maybe not. They had the turnover on downs, I remember, which was one of the broken plays that I think the wide receiver had the cornerback beat for, and then the quarterback just ended up missing the receiver. But that ended up being a turnover on downs, and that might have been the very last possession before Michigan State just ended up running out the clock. But it was the best win of the year for them. So, kudos to that. But to me, it's still a disappointing season. And that's really what the information I was trying to fish for from you guys, just to see where you were at as far as the season, as far as the game goes. You know what I mean? Did you watch the game? Did you have a rooting interest for Michigan State? Were you rooting against Michigan State like my Sports Carnage mate Dylan was and will be for all of the future in the all the future, as long as Mark D'Antonio's here, and probably anybody after him. That's really kind of what we wanted to decide. So let us know in the comments, whether you're watching this on Facebook, whether you're watching this on YouTube. Let us know who you were rooting for, and really just why. If it's a game that you watched, if you liked anything you saw and you ended up watching the game, let us know that. Also, obviously, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcast or iTunes. I don't know what you prefer to call it. I think it's called Apple Podcast now, but iTunes is much easier. Podbean. Find us on YouTube, Sports Carnage Podcast, on Twitter, Sports Carnage Podcast, Facebook, Sports Carnage Podcast. That's the really cool thing about having this particular name, is that nobody else does it. So if you just type in Sports Carnage or Sports Carnage Podcast in Google, it should take you to all the pages that we have. And that way you don't have to go to Twitter and find us, or go to Facebook to find us, go to YouTube, whatever. The front page on Google, it should have, or maybe the first two pages just to say stay safe, but it should have, all of our stuff right there on the forefront for you. So make sure you do that. Obviously, like our page on Facebook here, subscribe to our podcast. Rate, reviewing it, and commenting is like the biggest thing that you guys could do to help us out. And give us some honest feedback after you listen to one or two episodes, and just let us know what you think. But other than that, that is what we have for tonight. So thank you guys for joining me, and go green. Oh, now my mouse isn't going to work. So we got about 3. There we go. All right. Now we're out for real. False alarm.